Reading 127 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3. Great Amwell House, June 26, 1948. Wrong work of centers. Work idea. The work speaks of wrong use of centers. Commentary. On one occasion, Ouspensky said to Gurdjieff in so many words, "People are turning into machines. People no longer think. They become almost perfect machines in some very small way, as in a factory full of machinery, and they are content to be so. In fact, if they began to think, they would cease to be such perfect small machines." In reply to this observation of Ouspensky, Gurdjieff said, in so many words, "Yes, that is quite true, but you must remember that man has more than one mind. Actually, he has, to begin with, 5 minds, corresponding to the 5 centers, which work in quite different ways. It all depends first of all on which mind, which center, they use for the particular work they are engaged upon. If they use the proper mind, they will be able to think even better in the midst of all work with machines. But only if they use the proper mind for the purpose. He said, "You will understand later." Now this conversation leads directly to the question of the right center to use for any particular work. A man can use the wrong center for a particular job. This is wrong use of centers. A man doing a purely automatic hand movement job, which cannot vary, may use emotional and intellectual center, as well as moving center, in an unnecessary way. Say he has merely to tap something every second, but he concentrates on this small, minute automatic task, with the result that he wastes force. He thinks and feels when it is only necessary to tap. This is wrong use of centers. It is like using 3 horses for a job when a donkey is enough. On one occasion, Ouspensky said to me, "You take things too seriously. Try to understand what I mean." I replied later that to attach too much importance to something of no great importance is to take things too seriously. That is, to waste force. To attach great importance to small things may cause one to attach little importance to greater things. When I was in the carpenter's shop in France, I remember watching a man who came in with a rough piece of box in order to cut 2 laths. He measured again and again, made pencil marks, frowned, protruded his tongue, as we do, and finally sawed the wood in half. Then he spent a long time in planing the 2 strips so as to make them exactly equal, and tied them together carefully, and went off with them. He returned to get some nails and left the laths. Of course, such exact measurements were unnecessary, and to plane a lath prevents the plaster sticking to it. It is an example of poring over something small unnecessarily. Ouspensky once said, "Try to make important things important and unimportant things unimportant." I am sure this is good advice. Try to do it. Try to observe what it is that is taking all your force. Is it important? On another occasion, Ouspensky said, "A trained athlete is a man who knows how to eliminate unnecessary movements. Training is, so to speak, to learn how not to do things, not to do what is unnecessary. Then one does only what is necessary." On another occasion, Gurdjieff said to someone who was looking at a bed of flowers, "You think, I only look." I fancy he meant that this person was thinking what variety of peony was growing. Of course, in that case, you are trying to see beauty through formatory center. Emotional beauty is quite different. Or say you go to a picture gallery with another person who insists on giving you the history of the artist. Or you begin to argue. You will be unable to see the picture. That is, you are using the wrong center for the job in hand. One must learn simply to look, as Gurdjieff said. That is why you should, if possible, go alone to see pictures before you take another person. Oh, Dr. Nicole, do you not think that the rhythm running through that picture is wonderful? And look at the counterpoint represented in the colors. After all, painting is really two-dimensional music, is it not? One mutters to oneself, I do not know, but I know that I cannot see that picture in the presence of a person like you, and probably never will be able to, now, because I will always associate your silly remarks with the picture. It is really extraordinary how many people think that beauty can only be seen through theories. Theories are intellectual. Beauty is emotional and also instinctive. Now let us, in this brief paper on using the right center, speak of waste of force in connection with moving center. Some walk in agitation, others in stiffness. One can make all sorts of complex movements by habit. One might almost say ceremonial movements, as a dog does before settling down. But it is more in connection with muscle tension that it is important to modify movements as far as is possible. And the limit is soon reached. I told you the story about how a man in France, when the pigs got into the tomatoes, walked very slowly to avoid identifying and muscle tension, and told Gurdjieff. I fear that Gurdjieff roared at him and leapt, so to speak, about 400 yards to those pigs. This is a good example of wrong use of centers. As if, when the house is on fire, you observe your moving center and carefully try to make every movement consciously, with full deliberation. You must understand that people like that have no sense of scale, no sense of what, under the circumstances, is important or unimportant. This is really being stupid. Lack of seeing relative importance is a sign of being stupid. All intelligence in the work sense is being able to think relatively. Third force, that is, the force that connects you with the event, is certainly in such cases not hydrogen 12, a very high force of intelligence, but probably of the density of a piece of wood, say hydrogen 1536. I suppose the term wooden head may be derived from some esoteric school in this respect. One notices such hints or sarcasms in fairy stories, most of which come from esoteric schools of the past, and contain great depth of psychological meaning. Now a man who is identified and at the same time wishes to study for an examination will not be using the right center. He will waste force. It seems to me that one can study nothing without inner relaxation. Some people race through a book as if they were afraid of missing something. Of course, they miss everything. On the other hand, some sit down and stare at the book, groaning and sighing, or even tying wet towels round their heads. Of course, they are not using intellectual center, but almost their very bodies and muscles to take in the subject. I knew a man at Cambridge who used to stop smoking and drinking in order to read up for his examinations, but never grasped that if he really thought about what he was reading, he would not have to deny himself in this way. He failed, but always, I fancy, felt that he had made real effort. It is like jumping into the Tigris to save a brute of a mule when your wife and family are dependent on your army pay. Wrong effort, and especially effort to avoid effort, which is rather different, leads to enormous expenditure of force without result. But the work teaches that we live in an intelligent universe and have to find out what efforts give results. Now this paper is about something that requires examples. It is for all of you to try to give examples of wrong use of centers from your personal observation.